Welcome to another edition of Mr. Hattemer's live class. This is the afternoon version of the morning class. So for those of you that attended the morning class, awesome. Those of you that are not attending either class, you are allowed to watch these. So right now the morning class is posted on YouTube. After this session, I will post this on YouTube. So this will be a faster version because I worked out all the kinks from the first session. So anyways, here we go. So today we're going to see how to do the PowerPoint with guided notes. So I will start out first by sharing my screen. And I'm going to go to Edmodo first. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the post itself. So here is our Tuesday assignment. You're going to log into Edmodo. Think about what we talked about yesterday. There were 3 questions that you learned. What is the judicial branch? What is the difference between criminal and civil cases? And what is a dual court system? That was your exit ticket from yesterday. So hopefully you'll be answering those again today and doing better on those answers. Then it says download the PDF. Now, I have the PDF here, and so I'm just going to click on it, and then I download it. Or I can go to the assignment, guided notes. All right, click on that, and then view the assignment here. I'm now able to see everybody's assignment options, but at that point, you would get the opportunity to download the PDF. So let's just say I have already downloaded. So I am going to then share with you what that page looks like. So here we go. This is the PDF guided notes for judicial branch. So on the right side, once you open it up into Adobe Acrobat Reader, you have the ability to fill and sign. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on the fill and sign, and now I can answer this. What it does is it puts a little tab there, and then I can type in right on that line. So this is an easy way to enter our information. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask for any questions. Everybody seems to be good today. So let's get back to our PowerPoint. So we'll go back to Edmodo one more time. And back in our post, see the second attachment, we have the PowerPoint. So you can click on that. It will bring it up in Edmodo, and you can click through here, or you can download it and go through that. I've downloaded it, so I'm going to close this off, and I'm going to open up my PowerPoint. And here we go. So I am going to present to you the judicial branch PowerPoint now. There we go. So our opening slide. This is the judicial branch. We had previously learned about the executive branch. We learned about foreign policy, international organizations, all related to the executive branch. Now, this is our objective: analyze the structure, functions, and processes of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Here we can see on the left a picture of the front of the Supreme Court. Some people are sitting there on the steps. These is a picture of the judges. During President Obama's time in office, They are different now, but you can at least see the Supreme Court justices. So let's go straight on in. What is the judicial branch is our first question. Here we can see this is where our nation's court systems exist and where trials are held. So we're going to jump over quickly to our PDF, and we're going to type in what is the judicial branch. This is where our court system exists and where, at this point, I'm going to create a new tab and drop in there where trials are held. All right, and so that is basically what the judicial branch is. If I go back to my PowerPoint and click on the next slide, you can also see that the courts help settle disputes. And we're going to explain what all these are in just a moment. But let's go back to the bottom of this slide. There are two types of trials. We have criminal trial and a civil trial. We're going to learn about the differences between these. On the left, we have O.J. Simpson, and on the right is an explanation for something that's going on in a civil case. O.J. Simpson is also a civil issue too, but I'll explain that later. So let's go to our next slide. And this is where it says settle disputes. A criminal trial, this is the difference between civil and criminal. Criminal trial means determining if the law has been broken and what the punishment should be. A civil trial is going to be a little different. And we can see here a civil trial is a dispute between individuals or groups to determine if damages have occurred. The person suing is called the plaintiff. The person being sued is the defendant. In a criminal trial, it's similar, but the state would be the plaintiff or the city against the person who commits the crime, and they would be the defendant. So let's go back a couple slides, make sure we're filling out our information here. And on this side here, we can see that a judge acts as a referee, and it's the jury who determines innocence or guilt, and that is what is called a verdict. So let's go into our PDF and let's fill in some more questions. What is the main job of the court systems? Well, as we saw in our PowerPoint, it is to settle disputes. So, who is the referee of the court system? All right, we got plaintiffs, we got defendants. Somebody's got to sit over that. We call that person the judge. Now, we've seen trial by jury since we started learning about the history of America. And it goes all the way back to Magna Carta in about 1300s. Trial by jury has been something that has been very important for people. Every Bill of Rights has included trial by jury in it. So again, the jury is an important part, and its answer is, oops. Oh, it was there. I just changed my slide accidentally. So let's go back to there. Oops. All right, something just happened. I gotta stop sharing just a moment. Let me get control again. Let's get back to our guided notes. All right, so again, what is the role of a jury? To determine guilt or in no sense through a verdict. All right, now somebody put into the chat that they give punishment. No, only a judge gives punishment. So when a court case is happening, the jury will determine innocence or guilt. But if they determine guilty, they can only give a recommendation for punishment. Let's say a murder trial. They could say electric chair, but the judge could say, well, maybe it should only be 15 to 20. That's his prerogative, meaning he has the ability to do that. However, the jury will always recommend a sentence. But again, ultimately, it is the judge who determines what the sentence will be. So let's get back to our PowerPoint now. And here we go. So the civil trial. A civil trial is a trial that settles a dispute between individuals or groups, and they determine damages. This is different from a criminal trial, because in a criminal trial, what happens? They get sent to prison. In a civil trial, a little different. All right, again, civil trials settle disputes between individuals or groups, and they determine, let's go to the other line, damages to be assessed. All right, so let's go back to O.J. Simpson. Yesterday, when you guys sent in the exit tickets, I had several people say O.J. Simpson was an example of a criminal case, and that is correct. But O.J. Simpson was also an example of a civil case. He was found innocent of murdering his wife, but when they sued him civilly, the parents of the wife and O.J. Simpson's children sued O.J. Simpson and won, saying that the evidence proved that he was a bad dad, basically, in a sense, in the least, if he had not killed his wife. And therefore, millions of dollars was awarded to his children and to the wife's parents, bankrupting O.J. Simpson, which then caused him to try to commit a crime of robbing somebody who he had sold his Heisman Trophy, a very valuable sports trophy. He was trying to get it back, and that's why he ended up going to jail. Very different from being in jail for having murdered someone. So let's move back to our PowerPoint at this point, and we're going to see what the main job of the judicial branch is. Yep, that's right. It is to interpret the laws. Now, you can see in our picture here, we've already discussed the legislative branch. They make the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws, and the Supreme Court interprets the laws. What do they use to interpret the laws? The Constitution. So let's go back to our PDF. What is the main job? To interpret the laws using the what? Using the Constitution as its rule book. Oops, misspelled. All right, now, oops. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing it. Well, I'll leave that going while I talk here. So let's talk about Obamacare. Now, Obamacare originally was to force states to have health care. Now, if you were to go into the Constitution, you would see that nowhere in the Constitution does it say that government has the right to force healthcare on the individual states. But as we learned in the legislative branch, that Congress has the right to collect taxes. So when the case went before the Supreme Court, the states challenged the government. They lost because the government said, oh, no, we're not forcing you to have health care, we're forcing you to pay a tax. And so that was how they got around it. Now, if we go back to our slideshow, we can then see, did they do something illegal? Well, if they use the Constitution as the rule book and they can put taxes on us, they did not cheat. They got around the law, but the Supreme Court held it as a constitutional right to collect taxes. That's why we have Obamacare. All right, let's move on to, oops. There we go. All right, so our next slide tells us where law came from for us. Back in colonial America, we were following what is called English common law. What that means, if everything is common, everything is the same. It's normal. This is the way they do things. So the laws that were passed down were laws that had been around for 10, 20, 100 years. And they were just common, part of everyday life. When we get to the Articles of Confederation, though, that was one of the weaknesses. There was no court system, nothing. No national court system, no state court system, no court system of any kind. They could pass laws, but they could not enforce the laws because we know they did not have an executive branch, and they could not try any cases because there was no court system. So it didn't matter that they had any laws created in the first place. So once the Constitution is written, the Constitution establishes one court, a Supreme Court, and this will become the top court across the United States. So let's jump back over to our, oh, where did my cursor go? There it is. All right, let's jump back over to our guided notes. And here we go. What type of law existed during colonial America? I'm just going to jump down to this line, and we call it English common law. And then what was the name of the court system under the Articles of Confederation? Anybody? Anybody? That's right. There was no court system. Or we could say there was no court system. That's right, that's better. Of any kind. All right. Now that leads us to, what did the Constitution create? It created the Supreme Court. All right. Now, that gets us up to the Judiciary Act of 1789. So, stop sharing for just a moment, and we'll go back to my PowerPoint. So, we know that the Constitution established the Supreme Court, but did not establish any other courts. So, what we end up what they end up creating is the Judiciary Act of 1789. It came out at the same time as the Constitution, but just was an act of Congress. Article 3 said that they would create a Supreme Court and inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. What this was saying was, here you go, Congress, you have the right to create a court system now. So they did, and it's called the Judiciary Act of 1789, and this is what established the federal court system. So let's go back to our PDF, and what did Judiciary Act create? It created our national or federal court system. All right, everything's spelled right. Good. Now, we've got our national court system, but we're not quite complete yet. We need one more system. And what do we call that? Well, that becomes our state system. And so, here, before we get there, let's look at how the federal judicial system works in its entirety. So we say at the top, we have a Supreme Court. Now, the next level down are 13 federal circuit courts. All right, there's 11 throughout the state, there's DC, and then there's one last for the federations. And these are the different circuit courts. And then at the very end, we have the district courts. These are what are also called trial courts. And these are where the trials begin at. Now, does anybody know where our court is here in Lee County? You've probably driven past it if you've ever been on 41 and Martin Luther King. Yep, that's right. Martin Luther King at 41, that big building is where the federal district court is for Lee County. So let's get back to our PowerPoint. All right, so this leads us to our next slide, which shows us the map of the district courts. So we're right down here. We are the 11th Circuit Court, and it is actually in Atlanta. Next to us in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi is the 5th Circuit Court, and that is actually in New Orleans. One very famous circuit is over here on the left side of America. It's called the 9th Circuit. It is in San Francisco, and it has been one of the most liberal circuit courts. And one of the things that Trump has done during his presidency has tried to get a lot of conservative or Republican judges onto the 9th Circuit, and they've been very effective, and it's changed the way the 9th Circuit is starting to hear cases. So, do judgeships make a difference? You better believe it. Now, this leads us to our next information, which is a dual court system. So we said we had the federal courts. Now we're talking about our lower courts, which would be our state courts. So this is the 2-court system. Now, some of you answered on the exit ticket yesterday that it was a 2-court system, but that's not completely accurate. You have to have in there what those are. It's a federal court and a state court. The federal court is different than state. Our state court system would be in Tallahassee. So let's move on to the next one. And we can see one of the terms we're going to learn, which is the term of jurisdiction. Now, we talked about our district courts, the one in Lee County. That is the lowest level of the court system, and that is a trial court. And they have what is called original jurisdiction. So let's explain what jurisdiction means. You probably heard it in a cop show where police might be chasing a criminal from one city into the next, and then they have to leave once they cross into the border of the next city because they don't have jurisdiction. What that is meaning is they don't have the ability to arrest somebody. In the court system, it's a little different. Jurisdiction means who has the right to hear a case. Now, when we're talking about, say, a guy robs a bank in Fort Myers and he gets arrested in Naples, who has jurisdiction to try the guy? Fort Myers, because where did the crime commit? It was in Fort Myers. So let's get back to our PowerPoint here. And so original jurisdiction then becomes the place where the case can be heard for the first time. So those are always going to happen at the trial courts or the district courts, the first level. The second level becomes what's called appellate jurisdiction, which means they have the right to hear it after the first time. But those circuit courts that we talked about, the 13 of them, those are also known as appeals courts. All right, which leads us then to the top level we already know is the Supreme Court. They only hear appellate cases except for 3 different instances, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But they truly are more of an appellate court. Now, let's go back to our guided notes and let's fill out what is a dual court system. Well, it is a 2-court system, comma, a national court and a state court. All right, so there we go. 2-court system, but this is what the important part is. You must know that it's both a national court and a state court system. All right, which gets us now to page 2. What are the names again, one more time? It is a national, and then we have a state. All right, now we said the jurisdiction, it is where a trial can be heard for the first time. All right, an original jurisdiction then is a little different. Where a trial can be heard, sorry. Let's fix this one here real quick. All right, so original jurisdictions where a trial can be heard for the first time, jurisdictions where a trial can be heard, period. Heard. Period, can be heard for the first time, period. All right, now, what are district courts? Well, we've learned those are the trial courts. Those are the first time a case is heard. What are the appellate courts? Well, we said those are the circuit courts. Oops. All right, the circuit courts. And actually, I take this back. We'll take this one and we'll put it here for number 17. What are the Court of Appeals? They are the circuit courts. What are appellate courts? These are where someone can appeal to a higher court for them to, in a sense, double check the case and rulings. So what you end up happening is somebody will, let's say, get charged with murder, but they said they weren't there. They then appeal to the appellate courts level, which are the circuit courts. Again, ours is in Atlanta. And then they will get a chance to appeal to the appellate court. So here we go. Let's see what that looks like. So again, district courts, these are the trial courts. All right, the appellate courts are a higher court to reverse the decision of a trial court after final judgment or legal rulings. So let's look back at the PowerPoint again. When we say appellate courts, these are where someone can appeal to a higher court for them to double check, or as they said, or reverse a ruling, is what it means by double checking. All right, we got through, we're down now to what the Supreme Court is. So let's get back to our PowerPoint. Oh, there we are. I think we are. Let's see, double check. Bam. All right, so here we are. We know then that the circuit court is the court of appeals. So here you can see a picture of an appeals court hearing. Notice there are only 3 judges up there. It's not your normal where it's a single judge. This time you have 3 judges and they can rule together. They might rule against each other. It all depends. But this way you have majority, 2 to 3. Sorry, 2 to 1 in a 3-person court. You might get a chance to speak as this person is doing, but sometimes all they do is look at the testimonies and all the information from the original hearing, and then they can make a ruling based upon that. Which then, again, as I was saying, leads us to our last court, which is the Supreme Court. This is the highest court in the land. All right. So this is where if you appeal trial court, you go to the Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court. If you not happy with that one, you could potentially go to the Supreme Court. All right, again, these are the justices that were serving under President Obama. Now, there are 9 justices here at the Supreme Court. We can see all of them there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And here we can see Ms. Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg. She fell asleep at a State of the Union address a couple years back. And this was the beginning of where they were worried about whether or not she was able to serve. And so here we are. She is passed out, and she's probably the next judge who is going to potentially die. Why does that matter? Because we can see here that they serve for life. Unlike a president who serves 4-year terms, or a congressman can serve either 2 or 6 years, justices serve for life. All right, and now before we do this, let's go back to our guided notes. And what is the Supreme Court? It is the highest court in the land. All right, how many justices are there? That's right, 9. And how long do they serve? For life. So that gets us down to the last 2 questions, except for we're going to need to do one other slide of information. So let me stop sharing for just a moment, and let's see if anybody has any questions as of right now. I'm unmuting everybody. Does anyone have any questions right now?
Sir?
Go ahead, Angeli.
Why do I not see anybody else?
Well, unfortunately, nobody showed up to the afternoon class, but I'm still recording the session.
All right.
So,
I was like, wait, is there something wrong? Okay, sir.
Yes.
There's no questions. Let me just get ready to take notes.
All right. Well, you can go back and watch the beginning of this to see the rest of it, but I've got the last 3 slides I'm going to be showing and answering the last 2 questions. So here we go.
Okay.
Let me get back to our PowerPoint. So on this slide here, this is what the Supreme Court said was all that the federal court, the Constitution says that the Supreme Court was supposed to do. They didn't really know quite what the Supreme Court was going to, all the different responsibilities, but they knew it needed to deal with a couple of kinds of cases. So the first case involves 2 or more states. Now, back when Florida entered into the Union, Georgia had already existed, and there was controversy over the borders between the 2 states. So the Supreme Court heard that case. If you want to sue somebody in another state, nobody has, as we learned, jurisdiction because one person's in one state, another person's in another state. So in those instances, the Supreme Court would handle those cases. And then lastly, anything that happened overseas in another country that is foreign policy, that would be the Supreme Court. So anything that dealt with ambassadors committing crimes in other countries, or anything on the water, in the ocean, that is neutral territory. So the Supreme Court handles issues that happened on the water. And those were the main things. So you need to take a picture of this or write these down into your notes, but understand there are only 3 powers listed in the Constitution. So now you're saying to yourself, well, how do they know how to judge that? Well, that gets us to our next slide. So in 1803, now the courts have only been in existence since 1789, so this is what, 14 years later. A case comes up where somebody sues James Madison, who at the time was the, I think, Secretary of State for Thomas Jefferson. And James Madison, we know, is the guy who wrote the Constitution. But Judge, what's his name? Marshall, he was the Supreme Court Chief Justice. He said that what the Constitution established the judicial branches or Supreme Court's rights is to interpret the law, which means then that they have what's called judicial review. That gives the courts the power to declare laws unconstitutional. Now, this is huge. The reason is because at this point, now you have the whole idea, where's my slide? They are now able to check the other 2 branches. Up until then, the legislative and executive branch had more power, but by establishing this concept of judicial review, it gave the Supreme Court the same kind of power and authority that the other 2 branches had. So we can see here, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. That makes sense. All right, these guys study the law. They know the law, they've gone to school, they've been judges, they've been lawyers, and these guys know the law the best. So they should be the ones that determine whether or not Congress is passing good laws, or if the president is signing good laws. So this is what we will notate as judicial review. So let's finish up this. What is the judicial review? It is the right of the courts to declare laws unconstitutional. All right, and that is most important. Now, the case, it is known as Marbury versus Madison. Marbury is the guy who sued the government. Madison was the representative of the government who was being sued. Now, let's finish up our PowerPoint here, and then we can end this. So, with our understanding now of how things can be declared unconstitutional. In the late 1800s, our government, our court system said that segregation was legal. Now, if you don't understand what segregation, it means you can have a black school and you can have a white school. You can have a black water fountain, you can have a white water fountain. And that was legal. So now the courts about 60 years later come to realize that maybe we made a mistake. All right, segregation is not a good thing. We need to now make it illegal. So what they did was they overturned an earlier case and declared that unconstitutional, and the idea that segregation was unconstitutional. Now, how did this happen? Well, Citizen instituted a lawsuit. All right, that would be the Brown family. They sued the Board of Education, and in doing so brought the awareness to the government that segregation still exists and it was not a fair system. So the courts heard the case and ultimately ruled in favor of the Brown family and ending segregation. Within the next 10 years, you're going to have the civil rights movement and eventually the passing of the Civil Rights Bill. So as you can see, this is the way the government, the judicial branch and Supreme Court can check the other two branches. And from here, we will move into next week's lesson, landmark cases. So we're going to see some of these very important cases that have happened over time. So with that, that gets us through our PowerPoint and the guided notes. And so I will now open it up to any further questions. And so I can see that there are no other questions at this point. So I am going to stop the recording now and allow for those to ask any other questions out of the recording. So hope this has been helpful to you, and we will talk.
Mr. Hattemer?